But the other big trend we're seeing too is now these PE firms that are coming in, they're creating platforms, these portfolio brands sometimes out of thin air. It wasn't even like it was 5 years ago where you needed to hit like a 5 million EBITDA before they'll be even interested. Now they're right out of thin air starting, a platform. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, most of them are coming and they're spinning out a brand of 1 to 2 million in EBITDA. I'm sorry. The big economy, like you said, was originally 5 million. Then I've seen it go down to about 2 million. I'm talking about the established players like the Princeton, Thompson Streets, et cetera, and so on. But then they're dipping lower once they're bolting on these brands, as long as it's a similar with something complementary to the platform.
Sure.
But they're professionalizing franchising, from what I can tell. My experience is most of my clients are PE backed. So I would say the entrance of PE into the marketplace, even though it's making people greedy and sometimes stupid, I say it's on balance, it's professionalizing franchising. It's been a good thing.
Yeah, you think it's something that's been like a long time coming?
Professionalizing franchising, I think, has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
Like if you really, we had this conversation a little bit off air, right? So you had I-9 Sports, right? So you had a business format that if somebody followed your step-by-steps, okay, the logical outcome was going to be a vibrant business, almost certainly. Franchising is never done for the franchisor, which franchisors do for franchisees. There's no franchisor model. Show me the paint by numbers. Show me the book. Show me the course, right? Show me the academy. Show me any of that. Doesn't exist. Never existed. I think with PE, they're coming in more and they're creating their own franchisor platforms, which is what largely didn't exist.
Sure. And also at the same time, maybe it's also going to save that statistic about the number of franchisors that come in franchising and get out of franchising without being around long.
Well, that's that cottage industry of consultants that seemingly when they do their feasibility study never has a negative. Never hear, hey, you know what you really should do
is not
stick with your model.
You never hear that.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So as long as those attorneys and consultants exist and they're in the business of setting people up as a franchisor, that's going to exist. It's about 250 and maybe it's 350 new brands come out every year like clockwork, except for maybe COVID. Yeah, but it doesn't increase demand, does it?
No, it doesn't. And franchise recruitment, though, is the primary reason, I would imagine, why a lot of these franchisors don't really get going.
There's a capitalization issue, and then also there's a demand issue. They want the bigger brands. Right. So then what do? They sell as hard as they can, right? Because most of these guys, they gotta monetize their investments. But it's always at the expense of, right? The franchise candidate instead of with them. And if you really think about it from an investor standpoint, right? Can you and I agree that generally more times not smaller brands are higher risk?
Sure.
Because they don't have the track record, right?
Absolutely. It's like a stock, right?
And then the smaller brands generally don't produce the returns of the bigger brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're an investor, right, why should I go with the higher risk and lower return? Right? It makes sense.
Right.
Why would I do that investment? Except that they don't look at it like an investment. They look at it like a transaction, right?
Right.
So you got a lot of franchisors don't even emerging growth. What does not consume them is, how do I produce a better return than the big guy? How do I de-risk the model? How do I incentivize either organically or even artificially, right? Mm-hmm. How do I incentivize a great return?
Okay, so if you were a founder of an emerging franchise and you wanted to compete with the big boys, what are some of maybe a couple of key aspects of your business that you'd have to do to compete?
Well, what I would do is I'd drive the front end down as low as possible.
Meaning you would reduce, you're talking about
I'd reduce the franchise fee to the lowest point as I possibly can and stay in business.
Okay.
Because I understand a lot of franchisors need the revenue line, right? To
keep the lights on. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I might do is do a balloon payment and I would bake in performance criteria. Like, look, you don't owe me the money unless these things happen.
Okay.
But if these things happen, then I want, and can we both agree I earned the money and right? So stroke the check. I would probably stair-step royalties as a buffer, right? We worked with a franchisor one time. It's the sales in a very crowded space. If sales weren't X, royalties were 1%. Year 2, if they weren't Y, royalties were 2%. Year 3, if they weren't Z, then royalties were 3%. And then we got the buyer to agree. Look, if you're not hitting decent numbers by year 3, can we both agree it was a bad investment decision?
Right.
Then we'll just have you exit. But one of the things I learned by sitting in the valuation meetings, though, Frank, is that you can offer these incentives on royalties. It reduces cash flow. It doesn't reduce equity.
Mm,
Because when a franchisor buys or when a private equity firm buys the business, as long as those royalties melt, they'll give you the enterprise value of the full royalty stream and model it forward. So you're not really losing anything other than the cash flow. So I think franchisors, run the business sometimes, especially emerging guys, with maybe a little bit too much attention to immediate cash flow and not enough attention to enterprise value.
right. And the thinking,
Yeah,
obviously more short term, again, back to trying to keep the lights on, right?
that's
Yeah.
it's because they probably didn't have the right capitalization in the first place.
And they see what the big guys are doing. So they have these huge aspirations. I'm going to get to 100 units in, 3 years or something crazy.
I know we're going to do it on a shoestring, and I watched the episode of MacGyver that shows me I could do everything with duct tape, WD-40, and shoelaces, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So they try to run a business that way. A way they would tell a franchisee under no circumstance do it, right?
Mm.
So they don't even follow their own winning formula success.
Yeah.
Right? Just,
and the winning formula too is culture. And so I think we should talk about that, because when you came in to help me back in 2005, that was sort of an issue for my company. I had some people that had experience in running sports programs. So they were part of my business before I even franchised. So I did probably what a lot of franchisors do. Well, this was my staff before we franchised. So this is now the team, now that we're a franchisor. And I quickly learned that just because they knew how to run the sports business didn't mean that they should be supporting franchise owners.
I think the culture really has got to embrace entrepreneurship. And I think that's sometimes, Frank, emerging growth there's a breakdown. Because if you think of some of these emerging growth companies, they start out in that chain method, right? Mm-hmm. Where, the power and the decisions and everything's concentrated at the top, and then it trickles down, right? To the management level, who probably have the least decision-making ability to satisfy the customer needs. And then they apply that to the franchising model, thinking, franchisees, we just tell them what to do and they'll do it. Well, anybody who's been around an entrepreneur more than 5 minutes will tell an entrepreneur what to do. Like, they don't do it. They say, why?
Right. That's the first question. Why do I need to do this? Right.
And then they say, excuse me, why? Just do what I say. No.
But it is the entrepreneurs, though, that are open-minded and realize that they're not the end-all, be-all, that they do need an outside perspective. Those are the ones that succeed, right?
I think so. I think you can make it based on force of personality, and you would be an example of that, right? Mm-hmm. It's just they're not always the best suited for a franchise model. Franchising, it's full of compromises, right? So, somebody always asks me, what's the right business for me? My answer is always the same. It's the one you design for yourself. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's going to work, right? So, franchising for me, it's the buy or build argument. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could design it. That takes too long. It's very expensive. Or I could buy it, right?
Sure.
And if I buy it, then there's compromises along the way. Let's be adults about it, right?
Right.
And but they shouldn't compromise on culture, right? Like core values, that should be in alignment. You shouldn't compromise on that. Compromise on go-to-market strategy. Like the franchisee's got to really embrace the CEO's vision on how they're going to go to market, what the value proposition is, and ultimately what do you want the business to mean to the marketplace? Because if you're not in alignment on that, then they have no purpose of being in the brand.
Sure. Getting buy-in as an entrepreneur, though, could be let's face it, it's a little bit of a challenge. Realizing that when you're an entrepreneur before you franchise, you get to make the final decision. You just get to do what you think is best. And as the franchise system grows, suddenly you just can't turn. I used to like to say, you can't turn like a speedboat. You have to turn a little bit more like a cruise liner, where you have to get buy-in from people. Now there's an FAC involved, there's staff involved, there's more constituents to get involved in the decision-making buy-in.
And you got to respect the investments franchisees are making in the business, because they've got risk too, right?
Right.
And even on the emerging growth, when you get emerging growth, some of these, I call them listening structures, right? It can be formal or informal. Either one will work. Mm-hmm. You just got to know what the franchisee's concerns are. They need to be addressed and they need to be considered.
Sure.
They're part of the model, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember, this goes back years ago, you had written a book that talked about the different stages that a franchisee goes through. Remember, it was like the honeymoon period, and I forgot do you remember that? Some of the phases.
Yeah.
What are some of the names
Yeah,
again?
actually, it's funny. I'm relaunching. I just signed a book deal with Wiley,
Oh,
and
congratulations.
I'm publishing that now. So I was just looking at it yesterday. Yeah, so there's the launch, there's the grind, which is kind of when an entrepreneur demands results. They really don't have the capacity to produce yet, just because they're used to producing.
Right.
Then there's winning, when you start really, you have the getting it experience. You start acquiring the skills and acquiring the knowledge, so you can design positive outcomes. Then we call it the zone, where you're on autopilot, right? Just winning is habitual, right?
Right.
And then the exit, right? When's it time to cash out? So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of those stages.
Yeah, I remember reading it. We were out of that period of that grind. Once you get to able to survive on royalty and not having to sell another franchise to keep the lights on is a life-changing moment for every franchisor.
That's the epitome, right? That seems to be the real difference-making inflection point. But we even have a term for that now, right? Called royalty self-sufficiency.
Yeah, well, because you operate differently. You don't operate out of fear or desperation anymore. You're able to make really good decisions without worrying about where your next, where the next payroll.
I would call it a survival mentality. Right. Yeah, because when your royalties exceeds your fixed, you're going to survive.
Yeah.
Right. So now it gives you the opportunity to look long. It's kind of like, it's like anything. If you're in a concentration camp or a prison camp and you don't have so much bread, you're not worried about where you go to college, right?
No, I guess not.
You lose your capacity to look long. It's just a human nature thing, right? You just want to know where the next meal's coming from. And, franchisees do it. The franchisor does it. And I think one of the benefits of private equity coming in is taking the brands out of survival and capitalizing.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.